Tune into Nice Radio every Saturday at 7:30 a.m. for A View from the Outside, hosted by Brereton Horne. A View from the Outside takes a look at key issues affecting St. Vincent and the Grenadines and gives a global perspective on how these issues are viewed. Host Brereton Horne will examine a variety of topics to enlighten, stimulate debate, and explore solutions. Hear the facts, hear the real-life stories, hear A View from the Outside. Join Brereton Horne at 7:30 a.m. every Saturday on Nice Radio for A View from the Outside.
This week being the 13th of July 2019, we look at Remember, R-E-M-E-M-B-E-R, Remember, with the view being that Vincentians will do well to remember the things which impact on their lives in order to enable them to make sound decisions in the future. The Cambridge Dictionary defines remember as to be able to bring back a piece of information into your mind, or to keep a piece of information in your memory. That definition tells us that to remember is to bring back or recall a piece of information to your mind. That suggests that that piece of information was forgotten at some stage. The definition also tells us that to remember is to keep, retain, or preserve a piece of information in your memory. That suggests that you have never forgotten that piece of information. We, on A View from the Outside, explore this topic this week to encourage you to remember, whether you do so by recalling the piece of information or by keeping or preserving the piece of information in your memory. Many years ago, the English poet and author A.A. Milne wrote, "Promise me, you'll always remember. You are braver than you believe, and stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think." And so it is with the kind of confidence of A.A. Milne about your bravery, your strength, and your smartness that we ask you to remember. Carnival is over, and we commend the revelers and the police and all those responsible for safety and security throughout the period for a safe carnival. Apart from the music in particular, however, the revelry and celebrations are beginning to seem like a distant memory. Many Vincentians have already begun to talk about hardship which they encounter on a daily basis. Most bills, including electricity bills, are skyrocketing, and without employment or any means of income, many find life simply too difficult to cope. We need to remember that there was a time when immediately after Carnival, many had jobs to return to. It is at a time like this when we, Vincentians, need to remember that life was not always this hard. We need to remember that there was a time when there were many farmers in the country who enjoyed their independence. We need to remember that there was a time when agriculture was the mainstay of the economy and provided a livelihood and living to many in the country. We need to remember that the farmers, before they were reduced to underemployment and claimants of social assistance, provided employment to many. We need to remember the feeder roads the infrastructure network which was developed and maintained to assist farmers to transport their produce. And in that vein, we also need to remember the village road network referred to as Guti tracks, which provided and continue to provide road access to many homes. We need to remember that there was always access to education and that parents proudly sent their children to university without compromising their morals and degrading themselves. We need to remember when youth employment was nowhere near the 46% that it is today. And remember also when there was access to jobs without having to visit offices to be subjected to unpleasant and compromising experiences for a job. We need to remember when everyone and anyone could hold their own political view without being victimized or denigrated on the airwaves or in the parliament of the country. Yes, we need to remember that during that time of growth and prosperity, the entire country was so satisfied with the government that they elected them overwhelmingly in all 15 constituencies. And we need to remember all of those things, because there would come a time when we all would have to make a decision which could return St. Vincent and the Grenadines to those glory days of prosperity. It helps to remember, because the time to make that decision could come at any time, sooner or later. It also helps to remember that St. Vincent and the Grenadines has not always been a place where the rule of law is constantly being undermined, eroded, and flouted by the government of the country. It helps to remember that the current regime, despite its one-seat majority and amid allegations of election thievery, continually ignores the Constitution, the highest law of the land, and refuses to provide accountability to you, to us, the people of the country. There has been no accountability for the loans of Petro-Carib money. There has been no accountability for the money spent in the construction of the Argyle International Airport. There has been no explanation to the revelations from the Panama Papers when some Vincentians are said to have millions of dollars stashed away in foreign accounts. It helps to remember the appalling decisions of the Speaker of the House of Assembly in the country. Remember the decision that he made to prevent the opposition from bringing a motion of no confidence against the government. It's a decision which stands alone in any constitutional democracy. Remember too that the same Speaker of the House of Assembly, unbelievable but true, subsequently prevented the opposition from presenting a private member's motion to the House of Assembly. It helps to remember the many election promises which were made but not kept. Remember the cross-country road that was promised and never built. While sporting facilities in the country continued to languish, remember the perennial promise of a national stadium that was never built. No doubt, you remember also the promise of the tunnel under Cane Garden and the city at Arnesvale. It helps to remember the promise that the Argyle International Airport would give opportunities to local people, local traders. Instead of that, it appears that one family owns and operates everything, and those local traders are not allowed in. It will help also to remember that during the last election campaign of 2015, you were told that there was available to spend $400 million. $400 million you were told was available to be spent. Well, you may be wondering, where is that money? And if indeed it did exist, why are Vincentians not benefiting from it? With the mention of the election of 2015, it will help to remember all of the controversy surrounding that election. Remember the protests on the streets of Kingstown and Layou the day after the elections. Remember the protest at Government House when people tried to prevent the swearing in of a prime minister because they said that the elections were fraudulent and were stolen. And remember, the prime minister was sworn in almost by stealth at nightfall. Remember the election petitions which ensued from those elections. And remember that those petitions are now before the Eastern Caribbean Court of Appeal, still to be decided, and still to determine whether the current regime is a legitimate government. It helps to remember Yogi Farrell and the way she was cruelly treated by the establishment to ensure, and you would remember, so that you ensure no other young woman or anyone else for that matter is ever made to endure the harshness of the agents of the ruling regime. Oh yes, there is so much to remember and so little time to do so that we cannot list everything. But remember Glenn Jackson and the contribution that he is said to have made to get the current regime into government. Remember, he was killed, murdered, and remember that the nation and the world were told that he was killed by the bullet of an assassin. Remember that we were told that Scotland Yard and others were investigating. Yet, his mysterious murder remains unsolved. Remember E.G. Lynch also, and remember the contribution that he made to the opposition New Democratic Party, the NDP, and to the political landscape of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Just this week, in fact, on the 9th of July, 2019, it was the 5th anniversary of his death. Remember that he had to battle lawsuits, and remember the boasts that were made of not forgiving him when he asked for such forgiveness. Remember Edgar Cruikshank, a former supporter of the ruling regime, who, it is said, was on the verge of announcing his support to the opposition when he was mowed down at an NDP rally. And so, in recognition of the fact that we cannot list all of the things to remember on this program, we, on A View from the Outside, encourage you to jog your own memory, to remember those things which are not already lodged there. You will need them to aid you in making crucial decisions. And as you remember, we remind you and encourage you to find comfort in the words of A.A. Milne. And I quote him. A.A. Milne said, "Promise me you'll always remember. You are braver than you believe, and stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think." Until next week, Dougie and all of the listeners, this is Brereton Horne with A View from the Outside, with a reminder to send feedback as usual to aviewfromtheoutside@hotmail.com. You can catch us on Facebook at A View from the Outside and on YouTube at JMB Horne, and also on Vibes Caribbean.